season. This one, like our last one, is co-sponsored with the Center for Puerto Rican Studies at Hunter College. That last was an all-day conference just last week on the history of the Puerto Rican community in New York City since the Second World War. There are a whole bunch of fascinating forums that are coming up. We've got one on sex, we've got one on architecture, one on police violence, one on new immigration, one on wood history. Check them out. There's a flyer out there. The flyer will also have our website address, www.gothamcenter.org, which will tell you about all of the other projects that, in fact, we're launching at the Gotham Center. A few words about tonight. I guess you might say this had its genesis, but I was reading Juan Flores' terrific new book, From Bomba to Hip Hop, Puerto Rican Culture and Latino Identity. And his deft analysis of changes both in musical styles and in the Latino community in New York City was so impressive that I immediately thought that we wanted to have him do a forum. Then I immediately thought that we wanted to make it a musical. And sort of like Leonard Bernstein used to do with the Philharmonic, intermixed music and discussion and stuff. So I asked Juan, and he agreed, and he enticed the renowned musicologist Rene Lopez and the spectacular Nelson Gonzalez to join us, and the rest is about to be history. Now in a second, I'll turn the floor over to Juan to make the introductions about the evening. But first, a few words for those who aren't already fans of Juan himself. Juan teaches here with me at the Graduate Center. He's a professor of sociology. They claim, although I really consider him to be an historian, or actually better yet, he transcends these kind of narrow academic boundaries. He's also a professor of Black and Puerto Rican Studies at Hunter College. And among his many works, one of my favorites is a new edition of that indispensable chronicler of New York's Puerto Rican community, Bernardo Vega. Now, after we're finished, Juan has kindly agreed to sign copies of his book, which will be available for sale outside. Also, for those of you with strong backs, I'll be selling copies of Gotham's book that I did with a colleague. It's a history of New York City, and it weighs more than some of you do. Last thing is, you'll see that we're going to be videoing this event. This is not going to be for broadcast, given the sharks that swim in the commercial waters out there. We don't want the musicians to be ripped off. But what we are going to do with it is, in addition to having it available for archives and classroom use here at the Graduate Center, is that we're hoping we can use it as a prototype which we can take to various funding sources and see about the possibility of doing this full bells and whistles, high production values, give Buena Vista Social Club a run for its money. So to help us, it would be helpful to us so that when the camera pans around and sees nothing but happy masked, faces, if people in the back, I know you're comfortably settled, but if at least some of you could please help us out and come down a little bit and fill in some of these blank spots so they won't look at it and say it's like Yankee Stadium on a bad day and there's empties in the bleachers. We were really glad to have this in the music hall downstairs, but the music department has first dibs on things. So we're in this, enormous. Well, I'm sure we'll fill it up before the evening is out. But nonetheless, if anybody, who's maybe finally a little bit energetic can come down and fill in some of these green spots here, that would be terrific. All right, then let me turn you over to Professor Juan Flores.
Wallace mentioned his book. I want to add to that it's a really important book about the history of New York. It really reverses a lot of the myths and false assumptions about the history of our city, and that also I will mention that he was a winner of the Pulitzer Prize this year, so it's no small achievement on the part of my father. Well, when Mike first asked me to be Leonard Bernstein, I said, well, yeah, but only if I can do it with people who are probably more aptly to deserve that kind of a billing. And by that I had in mind a very, very close friend of mine, Rene Lopez, who I'm about to introduce. But I just want to say that what we want to try to do tonight is a kind of a guided tour through the history of Latin music in New York City, which is a long and illustrious history. And at the same time, use music as a way of better understanding our city. The history of Latin music and the history of New York City are deeply intertwined. Sometimes when the hype gets too heavy, those two things get separated from one another, and it sounds as though Latin music fell from the sky or came from some remote zone far, far away. But in fact, what's called Latin music, sometimes known as salsa, is sprung right from the streets that we inhabit, right here from our own city. And I think we need to restore that connection in order to understand both the music and the city a whole lot better than it's the way that it's presented out there in the media. So, but I really felt when he asked me that I'm somebody, yes, you know, I've read a lot about it, I've gone to a lot of concerts, I've met some great musicians in my studies. Some of them are here, right here, and I hope to be able to say hello to them for you all to appreciate during the evening. And I've taught classes at Hunter and other places, you know, about Latin music, about Puerto Rican music, but I'm not really the expert here. Because I have my professors. And the first and foremost professor of mine is Rene Lopez, who is internationally acknowledged and recognized as the authority, if there is one authority. He is the authority on what we call Latin music, or perhaps more accurately call Afro-Cuban music, or Afro-Caribbean music, or what have you. But Rene is a man with many hats with regard to the music. Some of you, probably a lot of you, either heard of him or know him. But first of all, he's a collector. He's been collecting records for many, 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 many years, and probably has, I guess, the best collection of Latin music selectively that exists. And the Cubanos come from Cuba to consult to the Bronx, to consult with Rene about their music. So it's like that. And Rene goes back everybody knows that I had the joyful pleasure one time of traveling for 2 weeks with Rene in Cuba, and you'd walk down the street just about anywhere, especially Matanzas, and you wouldn't hear anything but Rene, Rene, and now some musician or other. That city is filled with musicians, so you can imagine. Rene is also a producer of music. He's produced some of the best stuff that's out there in the name of salsa. And we'll hear something about that a little later on in the show. And also, he's a person who's in the who's a person to hang out with. I mean, his house on Matilda Avenue in the Bronx was where it was happening, and where it still does. But I mean, he's not there anymore. But during the '70s and the key years, some of the musicians in the band that he will introduce, and a lot of the musicians that you might have heard on record or heard about, they used to hang out at Rene's house and get in touch with the sounds, you know, from Cuba and from Puerto Rico. So that this is the guy that I think, you know, should be our Leonard Bernstein, but we'll do it together. Rene and I have done a lot of stuff together, so we're going to do this one together too. I want to now at this point introduce Rene Lopez.
Of course, it's a pleasure to be here, and a pleasure to work with Juan Flores on many occasions, and we always try to cover what we think is the truth as much as we can. Tonight, we have some outstanding musicians. They're absolutely outstanding. We were lucky to be together with Nelson Gonzalez, and it's a really all-star band. A lot of them actually involved in the changes that we will talk about. I think we should start off, first of all, with the music that's going to be played by They will play first the three of the many forms, but the most typical and the ones that represent most what became when he starts coming in fairly large numbers, which is after World War I. And with no further ado, because I'll keep on talking. I have a reputation for information overload, and I want to do that. I can watch out the details, but we've got no guidance.
next an aguinaldo, and then a paso doble. Those are some of the traditional forms that were present in the Latino community since its earliest time. And the Latino community goes back, unbeknownst to many, some people think it just started 10 years ago. But in the middle of the 19th century, it was already the beginning arrivals of Latinos, Puerto Ricanos, and Cubanos mostly into New York City as business and economic relations began to connect the United States with the Caribbean and Latin America. Although it was in the latter part of the century, especially in the 80s and 90s of the 19th century, that you began to get the makings of a real community with different sectors and with cultural expression true to it. At that time, the Latino community was comprised largely of exiles from the anti-colonial struggle against Spanish rule. We know that some of the foremost Latino heroes were here at that time. Lola Rodriguez de Tio, Jose Marti, Hostos, Betances, all lived here for some time. Jose Marti, the apostle of the Cuban Revolution, lived here for the last third of his life here in New York City. And this music, music like the danza, music like the paso doble and the aguinaldo, all of which, by the way, come in vocal forms too. We hear instrumental versions. Were typical of the music played during that and enjoyed and danced to during that late 19th and early 20th century period, all extending all the way up to around into the 1920s. At that time, the Puerto Ricanos that came were very close to the Cubans, and there was very little separation or line between the Cuban and the Puerto Rican population. They were in full-scale solidarity to bring an end to Spanish colonial rule, and the professional exile elite, as well as the artisan workers, many of them cigar rollers, and other kinds of artisans were here in the city and grouped in the same organizations to rally their support and plan military expeditions to liberate the islands from the waning Spanish colonial rule. In 1917, a very important bifurcation took place in the sense that Puerto Ricans were granted or decreed citizens of the United States, and that then spurred even more migration into the city, such that by 1930, the Puerto Ricans were by far already the largest Latino group in New York City, doubling the size of the Spaniards and the Cubans combined. So that then you get the makings of what we have all the way down through the decades of a massive working class migration of Puerto Ricans under conditions of colonialism. That is, from early on, it became clear that the presence of Puerto Ricanos was conditioned by the colonial relationship to the United States. And a lot of the migration all the way through was orchestrated by deals cut between the United States government and the corporate elite. So those were the conditions of the very early period, usually left out of the history books when we can talk about the people of New York City. The Latinos somehow don't make their appearance until much later. But now what we have, thanks to Bernardo Vega, and thanks also now to Gotham, which does give some play to it, we know that our history goes way back, and our music, Latin music, goes way back.
the emergence of those musicians and their recordings allow the record industry to start selling their records not only in the Spanish-speaking communities in the United States and in those countries, but also in the Spanish-speaking countries around the world. They start gaining some fame. And one of the things that really pushes Cuban music is the prohibition. With prohibition, many American tourists go to Cuba for weekends and weeks so they can drink and gamble, whatever. And as that starts to happen, the Cuban music that they hear in Cuba becomes popular to them. And another thing that actually becomes very important as we go into the 30s is the emergence of the film industry and talkies. The talkies are very important because since it's something that's set up for consumption, what happens is that they're constantly looking for new images. Already, what's next? Okay, we did that, what's next? One of the important things that happens in starting with silent movies is the exotic image of the Latino. The exotic image of both Latino man and Latino women. The music that accompanies that becomes in the 30s a music that is played on the screen, and the Hollywood companies, they have no idea of really what Puerto Rican is or Mexican. So that image is very blurred. And you see Mexicans playing conga drums with that instrument right there, and you see Latinos, they just see it as Juan's words, the generic Latino. But that becomes a very important image and also creates dance crazes. The time was one, and of course George Raft, one Latino is the big there. And then later on the rumba and the conga lines become mass participation. So as we get into the technology in the 30s, we start, and with that, before we talk about the depression, before that starts happening, there's a certain sound that starts emerging. The two basic sounds that is the music of the working communities of the United States and the Latino community is the son and the plena. And we're going to have the group play two fine examples of that music. But before we do that, I'll have Nelson Gonzalez is going to introduce the musicians, and they're going to play a very popular song that is Son Mundano, and then a very popular plena and Bombón de Negro.
Thank you. Welcome. My name is Nelson Gonzalez, and the music that you're about to hear is going to be like one of the greatest. Let me introduce Son Mundano. The greatest bass player, Mr. Joe Santiago. The rhythm section is going to be taken care of by Mr. Danny Del Valle. Our horn player, Tony Rosa. And my second is Mr. Nicky Manfredo. We have one of the youngest and one of the best football players on earth, Mr. Jimmy Watch. A legend, a man that's been around and he's the son of Mr. Chocolate. Rosa.
songs that established themselves as the national popular forms of Cuba and Puerto Rico, Son Mundano and La Plena Puertorriqueña. These were both recorded amply in the 20s and early 30s and established the tone of the music for the years to come. In the 1930s, when the 1930s hit, the Depression years really hit very hard on the Latino. And the Puertorriqueños and Cubanos coming in suffered their share of serious problems economically, including the musicians. The musicians here all have other jobs. You don't live in this country for music. And the pipe fitters and the steam fitters and the superintendents and all that, the workers, the musicians were during those Depression years were also hit very hard. I'll refer you to the book by Ruth Glasser, who was going to join us tonight but couldn't, who produced a beautiful book, My Music is My Flag, Puerto Rican musicians in their communities in New York City. Terrific book came out a few years ago, and she documents the severity of the economic crisis that hit the homelands in the Caribbean and hit the Puerto Rican and Latino communities here in New York. As I mentioned before, by the time you get into the 30s, the Puerto Ricans are established as the largest group in the city numerically, and remain so increasingly for over 50 years. At this time, despite the hard times though, as Rene will bring out, the music industry was in a different story. And here we're going to actually play, as a result of that, the two faces of the experience. One, the hard years of the Depression, epitomized, and we're going to play a recorded version, the historic recordings of Rafael Hernandez, Lamento Boricano, song by Danilita, the first version recorded in 1930. And this was the song that resounded from the storefronts in the streets of El Barrio during the years of the Depression 1930, as so well documented by Bernardo Vega. Immediately after that, we will play the recorded version. These are going to be fragments, unfortunately, one about a minute and a half each one, of the first huge mega hit Latino music, El Manicero, by Don Aspiazo Band, composed by Moises Simon and sung by the vocalist Antonio Machin. So that's when we'll have recorded versions, but first Rene will say something about the developing music industry at the time.
I just wanted to say, generally hard times are booms for music. ourselves in New York, Latinos. This is also already time of Latino Puerto Rico child, Manuel Kendall, who both born here, and Tico Rodriguez, of course, is in Puerto Rico, and he will come here as a young man. Machito was from Cuba, but he arrives in 1936. This was what forms the nucleus of the music that is then going to take hold in New York in the 40s for the later mambo craze. But the music that's popular with the Latino community, which are the two examples we were here at the time, is the music of Rafael Hernandez, the music of Pedro Flores, Plácido Acevedo, great trumpet player, Benito Marcano, and of course the tune that you hear, the first tune sung by the great Puerto Rican singer Davidita. The Manicero, just to show you how the music industry is happening, becomes a hit. It's really the first crossover hit. Machín comes here with Don Espiazo's band, they perform at the RKO Palace, they're kept over. Machín comes out and sings a song. He also sings one called Triste Lucha, which is about the black captive, and it comes out and sings in chains and that kind of thing. And Machín's song, or Moisés Simone's song, becomes a hit around the country. It's soon recorded by a lot of mainstream bands, certainly jazz bands. Louis Armstrong records it, Duke Ellington, and all of the others. So this is already what started to happen in the 30s. We'll first play the tune by Cuarteto Victoria de Rafael Hernandez with Davidita, and then the Manicero with Moisés, with Antonio Machín singing.
John, the first two tunes.
soon became known as Rumbas. Really nothing to do with the rumba. They would call them as a really soul music genre.
When we pass to the 1940s period, 40s and 50s, we come to a time where in Puerto Rico, you have the move to industrialize the island. The crises that hit the agricultural economy during the 20s and 30s made it obvious to the Americans in charge of their corporate connection in Puerto Rico that it was time to change the economic situation, and they moved to establishing light industry on the island under the title of Operation Bootstrap. This momentous change in the economy also carried with it the planned immigration of hundreds of thousands of workers that were made redundant as a result of the industrialization process. And as a result, you have the huge transformation of the community as it multiplies rapidly in size. But just to give you an idea, between 1940 and 1960, the Puerto Rican community in New York City multiplied by 10. It increased 1,000% from approximately 60,000 to over 600,000 people by 1960. That's just New York City. In the United States as a whole, it approaches 1 million. So that by that time, the Puerto Rican community becomes approximately 80% of the Latino population in New York City, overwhelmingly a Puerto Rican community. However, that period is known as the Mambo era. Rene will tell us a little bit about the major musical changes that came to bring Mambo, and then we'll hear some Mambos from our great band.
We're still playing Mambo. The Mambo is, first of all, it's not called Mambo in Cuba. There was no dance craze called Mambo in Cuba. It was referred to the last part, the third part of the tune, which was something created by the movement in Cuban music, sort of can be compared like with bebop. Young musicians that already didn't want to stay packed with the forms that existed. The bands were changing. They were writing musicians now rather than play like Choco, although he does both. They were generally the music was said that this was an improvised trumpet. But already in the 30s, they started writing arrangements for these groups, and the popular music groups started marching. They didn't have conga drums at the time. That gets added on in the early 40s by Arsenio Rodriguez, the great Arsenio, who can follow the mambo. And he also adds the piano, and oftentimes if there was a dress, there was not a piano. And he also adds first 2 and then 3 trumpets. That sound, that analog sound, becomes the format for what's going to be known later as the mambo. That and also a style in both Cuba and the United States, where the bigger bands were always called jazz bands, even in Cuba, they were called jazz bands. That's the style that Manuel Balzan and Machito, and then Jose Rebello, and then later on Marcelino Guerra, bring to the 40s. They bring the format of the big bands. Those are the bands that popularized the mambo. At least in the local areas, the mambo should be popularized internationally by a gentleman by the name of Perez Prado, another Cuban, who has a very stylized version of what the mambo is, and has some very big hits in the 40s. So the music is changing, the style is changing, the soul now becomes a mambo, and here, they're not called mambos at the beginning, they're called specials. The one that was used to call about specials.